A couple of good safety and ethics points about foraging. So there's one plant right here, all by its lonesome. Anybody know what this is? I heard, yeah, bee balm, but it's confusing because I also heard the name bergamot. And so people will use those names interchangeably because there's two species in the genus Monarda. One is called wild bergamot and one is bee balm. And to me, this one is the one I call bee balm. It's the one with the bright red flower. And the one with the purple flower is the one I call bergamot. But it depends who you talk to. And that's why, again, it's great to know the botanical names. So if you really wanted to know, this one is called Monarda didyma. And it is one of my favorite spice herbs. It's also called wild oregano. And I feel like that's a great name for it. So it's in the mint family, and we know that because why?
Square stem.
And, yeah, so square stem and opposite leaves, directly opposite each other on this stem. So that's how we know, and if it had flowers, you might be able to tell, maybe not so much with this one, but other ones in this family, that it would have little lips on the bottom petal. So, and it's super aromatic. Maybe not exactly like a mint, but if it's very aromatic, then, and it has all those other things, there's a very good chance it's a mint. So I'm going to pass this around so you can look at it. You can crush it a little bit and smell it if you want. But I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about a couple of things. One being, is this the best place to harvest from? No, why? National forest, why else? On the road, yeah, so both those things, right? That's a good point. We're in national forest, so you should have a permit, but also it's on the side of the road, so there's going to be pollution from the cars driving by, from the runoff and the air pollution. So really good to think about those things. And another one is that I see one more now, but like there's two of those here. I know that these are actually pretty prolific plants, but if we didn't already know that, or even if we did, this patch is not very prolific. So ethically, we would not want to harvest here. There's all different kinds of rules, but what I found is you have to really get to know the plant, because some people say don't take more than 20%. Some people say if there's 7 patches, you can take 1 out of every 7 patches. Or if there's 7 plants in lots of 7s. It's like the rule of 7. So, but that's not true if it's an endangered plant, right? And then somebody said, very great point, well, what if you take 20% and I come along and I take 20%, somebody else comes and they take 20%. So you have to really get to know the plants and research them. And a great resource for that is United Plant Savers. They do a lot of wonderful work to preserve wild and especially endangered herbs. So check them out. You can join and get free, awesome wild endangered herbs. But also they have a great list on their website of endangered and at-risk plants. But yeah, do your research. Good one to know. So we'll get to try some bee balm later. I make a spice out of it with stinging nettle and I think wild mint in there. I'll have to double check, but some salt as well. And I call it wild za'atar. So if you're familiar with the spice za'atar, it's a Mediterranean spice. And they have their own special species of oregano that they work with that they call za'atar. But instead of that, I work with this as my wild za'atar. So it's super tasty, and I put it on some popcorn for y'all so you can try that. I also really like it on avocados. It's yummy that way. But anywhere where you would eat oregano, you can add this plant in, and it's super yummy. I also infuse this one into salt. So there's a lot of wild salts that you can make. So we talked about the evergreen. Now we're talking about this one. But it's like the sky's the limit with salts. So start thinking about that, yeah.
So the blossoms are edible and a beautiful garnish?
Yes. Blossoms, edible, garnish. Also, it makes a great tea and is antimicrobial.
Cultivars. I mean, I've got a bee balm that's in my
Yeah, there's all kinds of cultivars.
It's all going to be
Edible, medicinal. I feel like wild plants are always going to be stronger. And so that's a really good point. Can you guess why wild plants might be stronger in medicinal action and more nutritious?
The soil.
Yes, y'all are all so smart. Good job. So like how we talk about terroir, right? Or terroir in wine, it's depending on whether you speak French or not. But yeah, it's the same thing with these wild plants. It's actually them having to deal with natural stress in the environment that creates nutrients and vitamins. So wild plants are going to be tens to hundreds of times more nutritious and powerful than even organic cultivated plants. So I would recommend to start foraging and to also start with one plant at a time, because this can be daunting. And people always ask me, how do you get started? So pick one plant that grows outside your back door and watch it all year long and research it and get to know everything you can about it till you can't not know that plant, which is a double negative, but that's okay.
Wild bergamot, is that gonna, if you like bergamot, can you use that for tea as well?
Totally, yeah. So actually, wild bergamot is the flavoring for Earl Grey. So you could add it to your black tea and get a nice Earl Grey, which will be tasty. But it also have some of those, what's in there that makes it spicy, like oregano, is thymol. And thymol is also what's in thyme, but there's more of it in this, which is awesome because it's antimicrobial. So for things like sore throats, I love it. I have a cough and throat syrup back there that has that in it. So it's a really good one.
Wild bergamot's around here as well?
It is, but I don't see it anywhere near as much. But they're both great butterfly pollinator attractor plants too. So good ones to know for gardens. All right, let's walk. We're trying to get to this really beautiful spot right up the road where we're gonna see several awesome plants. Okay, this is a super quick stop because this doesn't have fruit on it yet, so it's not as easy to identify, but I don't feel like I can just walk past it without talking about it. Anybody know what shrub this is? Elderberry. Wow, y'all are awesome. Good job. Yeah, so this is elderberry, another native shrub, probably my favorite medicinal native shrub. It's fantastic because the berries have tons and tons of vitamin C, again, more than citrus fruit. And they have this super magical quality where they can actually prevent the flu virus from entering your cells. That's crazy magic. But it's also another great example of a differently shaped compound leaf. So all these are leaflets, but they're a different shape than the other ones we saw. The other ones are called palmately compound because they're like the palm of your hand. And all the leaflets are coming out from a central point, right? So the poison ivy and the Virginia creeper, whereas this one is called pinnately compound, which just means it's coming off of a central stem instead of one central point. So we would actually say that these leaves are opposite because this whole leaf is directly across from this whole leaf. And so it will get this cluster of white flowers. If you've ever heard of Saint Germain, that's a liqueur that's made with elder flowers, but it's also great for fighting fevers, especially. And then the berries are great for immunity, preventing flu and cold, but also once you have it, can shorten a flu or a cold supposedly by up to 4 days, which is pretty huge if you have a really bad flu. So it's a good one to know about and a fantastic one to plant in your yard. If you have a place that is wet, and they would love the soil around here because they like acidic soil. So a great one to plant where you are, and then you can collect the berries. You just got to get them before the birds. So you can put a net over them, right? But they are poisonous to eat raw. So you want to process them. You can dry them for tea. You can make them into jelly. You can make a syrup really cheaply, way more cheaply than you can buy it. So all of those things are awesome things about elderberry. The whole plant is poisonous. Well, except the flowers. You can eat the flowers just fine. The berries you can eat a few of and be fine, but they do have some cyanide in them. So cyanide can actually be medicinal. It just depends how you consume it and how much. So you definitely want to process them or cook them in some kind of ways. Some people pickle them, but you have to alter them a little bit chemically so that they're more medicinal. There's some pretty cool aquatic species of violets over there in the water. So that's not something you commonly see, is violets growing out of water. And you can see how tall those violets are. So that's a little abnormal. So that's kind of cool. And some more violet leaves down here so you can remind yourself about the heart shape. And I wanted to point out back there that this beautiful flame azalea just started blooming. That azalea is in the same family as those rhododendrons, and the same family as mountain laurel, and the same family as this dog hobble, all of which are poisonous, but it's also in the same family as this kind of funny looking curvy tree back here, which is called sourwood. Like most famous prize winning honeys in the world is from sourwood, and the leaves are edible. And something else in that family is blueberries. So this is one that doesn't really follow the rules so much as far as plant families go, because it's got some extremely poisonous plants in it and then some very edible plants in it. But something interesting to notice is that we could probably find blueberries if we looked a little bit further in the spot. So they're all growing in this spot, and they all have a similar habitat that they like. So that's one of the most common families in this area, is that blueberry family. And it likes it here because it really likes acidic soil. So because of the geology that we have here and the pines, things like that, we have acidic soil. So it really loves it here. That's the dog hobble. So yeah, this is the dog hobble. It's the one in the blueberry family. Not edible, but if you look at it closely, if you've ever seen blueberry blooming, these flowers look very, very similar. Those little bell-shaped flowers.
Yeah. Are there ever any fiddleheads here that we eat? I know up in the northeast.
No, not unless you plant them.
Okay.
Morels back in this, I think, next to the woods?
Maybe. There's a beautiful trillium, not edible, but lovely. Okay, so anybody know this one? So I heard smilax and greenbrier, both are correct. Smilax is the genus of this one. Also called greenbrier, sometimes called catbrier, because it has these thorns on it, so it is a kind of briar bush or vine, really. And I just wanted to point it out because these little tips on the end, these new young leaves with the tendrils, are really tasty. So a lot of people really don't like this vine because it has all those prickly thorns, and if you walk off trail in the woods, it will often snag you and it doesn't feel good. But it's tasty in this stage when it's brand new and it has those little tendrils and tiny leaves on it. You can eat that and it's yummy. It's hard to get enough unless you really go out to make a lot of anything out of, but it's great to add on top of a salad, or my favorite is just a trail nibble. So as you're walking along.
It's also one of the favorite foods of the deer.
Oh, good to know. There you go. I did want to point out this, since we can see the bark really well. What tree is this? Birch. Yeah, this one is really common around here because we're very lucky, and it's called black birch or sweet birch. Same thing. Betula lenta, if you want to know the scientific name. And the way that I know it's that one, there's a couple of different things that clue me in. And one is, if you look at this bark, can you see that it has red lichen growing all over it? That's one way. Another way, not necessarily to figure out which species it is, but to know it's a birch, is that it has these horizontal lines in the bark. Cherries also do that, so that can get confusing, but if you see that, you'll know that it's probably a cherry or birch. And if you can see up there, some of the leaves grow in pairs. And that one too will clue you in that it's most likely a black or sweet birch. And this one is my favorite because when you chew on it, it tastes minty. And Doug Elliott calls it the toothbrush tree. So you can take the twigs and like chew the end a little bit till it softens up and then use it as a toothbrush, and it gets the tartar and plaque off really well. It's awesome. And it's tasty, just like mint toothpaste.
The bark is nutritious as white bark, birch.
White birch?
Yeah, that's very nutritious.
As far as I know. I have not eaten the bark of this one. So it's a great one. It's also wonderful for pain if you want to talk about herbs for a second. It's great for pain. It's got methyl salicylates in there, and salicylic acid is what's in aspirin, and this and the salicylates in here and in willow is what they synthesized aspirin from. So this is the original right here. But it said if you have any kind of blood thinning issues or you're on blood thinners, not to take it. It's not supposed to have the same side effects, but just to be cautious not to take it. So if you were out in the woods and you were backpacking and you were really sore, you hiked really far that day, or maybe your ankle was hurting a little bit, something like that, you could chop up some twigs of birch and simmer them for a few minutes, and you'd have a nice, tasty, pain-relieving tea. So it's analgesic like aspirin and anti-inflammatory. So it's a good one to know about.
Do you use the bark too?
You can harvest the bark, you can tincture it. I prefer to harvest the twigs because it's less invasive to the tree. Yeah, good point. But if you are going to harvest the bark, you should always do it in a long, narrow strip going vertically. Because like we were talking about that xylem and phloem before, the medicinal part of the bark is the inner bark, not the outer bark. And that's what you're trying to get to. But it's so nutritional because that's where all the transport is going on. That's where all the sugars are that have all of the vitamins and minerals. So if you cut that off all the way around the tree, it can't transport those things and it will die. So don't do that. Harvest the twigs if you can.
Of all the birches edible, the leaves? I know they make tea out of them.
I don't eat the leaves. Most tree leaves are pretty bitter.
I know in Iceland they use birch for a lot of teas and making salts.
Oh, nice. That's good to know. That would be great. Yeah.
Yeah, they use the leaves.
Well, yeah, teas are going to be a little bit different than just eating them. This right here is chickweed with the little white flowers. Its genus is Stellaria, which means star, because it's shaped like a star, right? The little white flower. So this is usually a very common weed, but not so much right in this general spot. You've more likely seen it in your garden and maybe cursed it before because it gets very prolific. But weeds are awesome. So instead of cursing it, you could eat it and make medicine out of it. And it is very, very nutritious. It's got a lot of protein in it, which is really rare for plants. So good one to know, again, in a survival setting. And I love just munching on it. It's going to be in the food we're eating later. It's my favorite plant for pesto, for wild pesto. And if you want that recipe, it's on my blog, by the way. But yeah, it's really tasty. This is the woodland chickweed, so different species than you'll find in your garden most likely. And you'll notice it has opposite leaves, which is a good way to figure out which one it is. And if it weren't so wet, you might be able to see a very tiny row of hairs going vertically down the stem that does this crazy thing where when it gets to a joint with other leaves, it switches to a different side of the stem. It's the only plant I know of that does that. So it's a really good way to identify it. But also that star-shaped flower that is white. So very edible raw, not bitter, and also medicinal, great to add to salves for skin soothing, and can be helpful to clear things like cysts out of the body, cholesterol, extra weight, so clearing things out.
And it's the leaves?
It's the leaves. Generally, I'll eat the whole plant, but the stems can get a little fibrous. So if it's getting later in the spring like now, then I might just harvest the leaves to make food. But if you were going to make medicine, the whole plant is great.
So if you're doing pesto, you would still just harvest the leaves this time of year. You can't, the fiber
It
shows up once you
depends how hard. I mean, if it's starting to feel really hard, like almost woody, then I wouldn't put the stems in there. But if it's still kind of soft, then I will. Especially if I'm going to grind it up in pesto.
And the flowers as well?
Flowers as well, not the root. I haven't heard of the root being edible, but all the above ground parts are great. Yes. Also great for coughs. So throw it into a cough syrup or tea. Not a great one to dry because it's so full of water that it will just shrivel up into nothing. Well, I think, unless Patrick saw something else awesome.
I didn't see anything else awesome.
Okay.
I was looking.
Besides what's already, I mean, just because we don't know what to do with it doesn't mean it's not awesome. Yeah, but we'll head back to the farm and then we'll eat.